So hope most of you must have logged in for the Wednesday morning class in pharmacology. So good morning to all of you. So today let us start discussing something about an important group of drugs in treatment of several conditions, especially related to the bleeding profile of an individual or the risk for bleeding in an individual, and therefore we will try and discuss drugs that help in coagulation as well as drugs that prevent coagulation, which are called as anticoagulants. So coagulants and anticoagulants. I will go in a very natural sequence of the way the things have evolved in history for coagulation system and the drugs that are acting on the coagulation system. So first and the simple basic elementary thing is try and understand something about vitamin K. So all of you have studied vitamin K at different levels in the school and college and also in the first year in physiology as well as biochemistry, and everyone instantly connects with the concept of vitamin K as a coagulation factor. So vitamin K is not vitamin C, because coagulation we tend to write with C, but it is vitamin K because the first time something related to vitamin K's role on the coagulation in the blood was reported, it was in a German journal, and in German language coagulation is written with K, and therefore that is the reason why vitamin K is represented with coagulation. Vitamin coagulation is represented with K and not C. So let us see what is the physiological function. How does it help in coagulation? What is the recommended daily intake for this vitamin K? What happens in deficiency of vitamin K? And is the deficiency really very common? And if so, in whom? And what are the therapeutic uses of vitamin K? So hopefully at the end of this session you should be able to have answers to at least these questions regarding the physiological function of vitamin K, how much is enough for an individual per day, what would be the features of deficiency, is really the deficiency a big concern, and if at all there are any therapeutic uses, what are the therapeutic uses, in whom does this vitamin K help as a therapeutic agent or a prophylactic agent. So for this, when we go ahead further, let us see first of all from where do we get this vitamin K. So the rich sources of vitamin K primarily are plant sources. Vitamin K, as you all know, exists in three primary forms: vitamin K1, vitamin K2, vitamin K3. Now vitamin K1 is the one that is abundant in nature and that is obtained from green leafy vegetables. That is basically because wherever photosynthesis happens, chlorophyll is there, vitamin K is also abundantly synthesized. So the natural sources primarily are plant derived, and that type of vitamin which is derived from plants, that vitamin K1 is the name for that compound, and it is also called, therefore, because it is plant derived, phylloquinone. Phylloquinone. Apart from phylloquinone, the other name for this is phytonadione. Phytonadione or phylloquinone is vitamin K1. Then what is the vitamin K2? Most of the people are aware that there is some scope for the vitamin K also to be synthesized by the bacteria in the large intestine, and therefore this is the vitamin K2. So whatever dietary vitamin K someone takes is further modified by bacteria in the gut, and that is called as vitamin K2. And apart from this, the bacteria can also to some extent synthesize from so many other compounds that the person ingests as a part of diet vitamin K, that is called vitamin K2. Now what is this vitamin K3? So the vitamin K3 is totally synthetic. Once we understood the structure of vitamin K1 and K2, we tried to manufacture synthetic analogs, and those synthetic analogs are called vitamin K3. So vitamin K3 are synthetic in nature. Vitamin K3, again there is fat soluble and lipid soluble, that we will go to in the next slide. So basically now, because we need to understand how vitamin K is absorbed when it is there in the diet, it is better for us to know that there are three forms of vitamin: vitamin K1, vitamin K2 and vitamin K3. K1 is the most abundant source in nature, derived from all green leafy vegetables, and that is vitamin K1, and it's also called as phytonadione or phylloquinone. It is lipid soluble. Vitamin K2 is what is derived from the gut bacteria, the microbes, and that is to some extent also modification of whatever is there in the diet that the person takes as vitamin K. So vitamin K1 becomes vitamin K2 in the gut, and what is vitamin K3 is something which is man-made and synthetic, and therefore it is totally available in the form of both lipid soluble and water soluble. Whatever is available naturally, we can't do anything to it, but whatever is man-made, we can make it both lipid soluble and water soluble. So once someone takes vitamin K, let us see what does vitamin K undergo in terms of its pharmacokinetics. So first step of pharmacokinetics is absorption. If you can see here, whatever dietary vitamin K is there, you know vitamin K is a fat soluble vitamin. Because it is a fat soluble vitamin, it will require the presence of bile and it will form a micelle. So this is the micelle, that is the vitamin K is inside and all the rest of the phospholipids with their hydrophobic and hydrophilic regions surrounding it. So this is the micelle, and that micelle will be actually taken up by the enterocyte and it will be packed as a form of chylomicron. So what happens whenever a person takes vitamin K along with the dietary fat, it is packed into the chylomicron, and you know the chylomicron has ApoA and ApoB48. We know that the intestinal epithelial cell is very efficient at manufacturing ApoB48. ApoB48, ApoA are apolipoproteins, because this chylomicron is lipid cannot float and easily travel in the plasma, because 55% of the plasma will be water. So therefore, to prevent any type of difficulty for the chylomicron to safely pass through the plasma, they are bound, the chylomicrons are bound by certain apoproteins which act as a boat to allow the chylomicrons to sail through the blood which is having about 55% of the water. So therefore, this chylomicron integrates into it even the vitamin K, and through the lacteal it will go into the mesenteric lymphatics and from there into the thoracic duct, and from the thoracic duct it enters into the circulation, and through the circulation when it goes through the capillaries, you all know capillaries have lipoprotein lipase. So the capillaries will add ApoA and ApoC and ApoE additionally apart from the ApoB48. Small amount of ApoA was already there, so ApoC, ApoE significantly get added here. So now the chylomicron is rich in ApoA, ApoC, ApoE, ApoB48, and it is going through the circulation, and when it is passing through the circulation, lipoprotein lipase will break down the chylomicron. When it breaks down the chylomicrons will become VLDL particles, and those VLDL particles, they are taken up by the liver, and in the liver the VLDL particles are packed into small vesicles and they are excreted out into the blood, and when they are circulating again after going through the hepatic system, they will be taken up by capillaries at different portions of the body, and the VLDL will become IDL and LDL. And again, LDL receptors are there, every tissue of the body has the LDL receptors, so this LDL will be taken up. But all through you can see that the fat transport in the form of apolipoproteins is also transporting vitamin K. The basic principle here is you have to remember that the vitamin K transport to different parts of the body happens actually along with the lipid fragments. Whatever dietary phospholipids, the triglycerides, the cholesterol is absorbed along with them. So initially we can see it goes along with the chylomicron, later it enters into the liver, becomes VLDL, secreted out of the liver as VLDL, and from the VLDL it becomes IDL, LDL, and as the LDL is being taken up by bone, LDL is taken up by every other tissue in the body, along with that the vitamin K is also delivered to the tissues. So vitamin K closely follows the lipids in our body. So wherever lipids are being transferred and made available to the tissues, at the same time simultaneously vitamin K will also be made available. So this is a simple revision. It helps in two ways. One, it helps you understand the movement of the lipid through the body from the site of absorption to the site of utilization, and also it tells you about how vitamin K moves along with the lipid fragments of our diet into different tissues of the body. Now, what are the factors that cause vitamin K deficiency? Most important is neonates are deficient in vitamin K. By default, they are deficient in vitamin K. Why is it that they are deficient in vitamin K? Most importantly, water soluble vitamins easily transferred from mother to the neonate, mother to the fetus. but the fat soluble vitamins are not effectively transferred across the placenta. This is a paradox. Actually, you may be feeling that any lipid soluble substance should easily cross the placenta. How is it that water soluble substances cross the placenta much more efficiently than the lipid soluble? Because the water soluble vitamins, they actually are transported by active transport system, whereas the lipid soluble are transported across the placenta by facilitated diffusion. And this is the difference why facilitated diffusion is lagging behind in terms of delivering the contents that are there on the maternal side to the fetal side. Therefore, most vitamins that are lipid soluble, they are not effectively transferred from the mother to the neonate, and therefore the neonates have very high probability of developing vitamin K deficiency. Then malabsorption syndromes. If someone has celiac sprue, someone has tropical sprue, that will interfere with the absorption of vitamin K, and therefore the person in the long term can become vitamin K deficient. Inflammatory bowel disease, someone with Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, because there is inflammatory pathophysiology in the whole bowel, that may again lead to malabsorption of vitamin K. Obstructive liver diseases. If there is obstructive liver disease, the bile will not be discharged into the intestine, and because bile is absolutely essential for the micelle formation, for the vitamin K to be absorbed, vitamin K absorption will be very low in people with obstructive liver disease. Prolonged use of antibiotics. If some individual is using broad spectrum antibiotics for a long time, those antibiotics will cause diarrhea and they will deplete lot of original bowel flora, and therefore the bowel flora may not be able to synthesize the vitamin K, and therefore after prolonged use of antibiotics, the individuals, because of their altered gut flora, may not be able to synthesize enough amounts of vitamin K. Intake of liver enzyme inducing drugs. If someone is taking rifampicin for tuberculosis, someone is taking phenytoin for treatment of epilepsy, someone is taking griseofulvin for treating some fungal infection, these are all microsomal enzyme inducers. Microsomal enzyme inducers accelerate the metabolism of vitamin K, and therefore the vitamin K levels in the body may drop. If you recollect, vitamin K is one of the vitamins that is stored in the liver. And the next point, if you go to 8th one here, I skipped the 7th, I will go to the 7th later. From 6th to 8th, intake of liver enzyme inducing drugs. If you take the liver enzyme inducing drugs, they will accelerate the metabolism of vitamin K. So whatever vitamin K is available for storage in the liver will be less. Now liver disease, what happens? In people with liver disease, if it is a chronic liver disease like cirrhosis, lot of hepatocytes are injured, the parenchyma is replaced by fibrous tissue. So the storage capacity of the liver for vitamin K comes down. Therefore, there will be vitamin deficiency in the long term with people with chronic liver diseases. In hyperthyroidism, what happens? What happens in hyperthyroidism is exactly similar to what happens with liver enzyme inducing drugs. Hyperthyroidism, the basal metabolic rate will be high and there will be accelerated metabolism of vitamin K in the liver. Is there a possibility of dietary deficiency? For many vitamins, dietary deficiency is common, but for something like vitamin K, the dietary deficiency is very uncommon, very rare, because most of the times enough vitamin K is present in the diet, because the daily requirement of vitamin K is not really very high. For adult male it is about 90 micrograms per day, and for an adult female it is 120 microgram per day. Unless someone is not at all taking any green leafy vegetable, or someone is not even taking dairy products for a long term, generally people do not develop vitamin K deficiency. Now you will get a doubt, abundant source sir, you mentioned only plants, where did this dairy products and where did this fermented products come in? Because if you look at vitamin K2 is produced by bacteria, and whenever there is fermentation is a product of metabolism by yeast or bacteria. So whenever fermented food is there is a possibility that there will be adequate amount of vitamin K2 in it. So therefore, if someone is not taking animal sources, like liver is again a rich source, animal liver is a rich source of vitamin K, because obviously many mammals store vitamin K in their liver. So if human consumes the animal liver, they will get reasonable amount of vitamin K. Fermented foods give vitamin K, green leafy vegetables give vitamin K. So dietary deficiency really is very unlikely. Then individuals on oral anticoagulants. Individuals on oral anticoagulants don't really develop vitamin K deficiency, but they develop manifestations of vitamin K deficiency. So it may not be real vitamin K deficiency, but whatever vitamin K is there in the body, it will be not allowed to show its physiological function. So therefore, the clinical features of vitamin K deficiency will arise in people who are put on some oral anticoagulants. Why? Because those oral anticoagulants block the functions of vitamin K in our body. So quickly, if you recollect, the conditions that may lead to vitamin K deficiency or manifestations thereof are individuals who have inflammatory bowel disease, malabsorption, obstructive liver disease, prolonged use of antibiotics, who are taking liver enzyme inducing drugs, people who have liver disease, hyperthyroidism, and individuals on anticoagulants will have manifestations similar to vitamin K deficiency, very rarely dietary deficiency, but the most important cause where there is a big national program is neonates who are by default vitamin K deficient, because neither the placenta allows the vitamin K transfer from the mother to the child, and another big thing is even during lactation, the breast milk of the humans contain very low amount of vitamin K, and the bioavailability of vitamin K that is there in the breast milk is also suspicious. So therefore neonates are very vulnerable to vitamin K deficiency. So how did the story of this vitamin K start? How did people really understand about vitamin K? If you go back to 1924, Wisconsin state in the United States, this is the sweet clover. This sweet clover is one of the main cultivations in different parts of the world, especially for feeding the animals. So this is a wild type of plant, belongs to Fabaceae family, and it is a very good nitrogen fixing type of a crop. So even in between crops, if someone wants to replenish the nitrogen stores in the soil, they will grow this. So when dairy industry was a big boom in the United States, then they grew this plant so that they could feed most of their cattle with this type of a diet. There is something with this, so you just keep in mind about Wisconsin, keep in mind about sweet clover, and then the mysterious cattle deaths in the United States. Most cattle that grazed in the fields that were copious in this sweet clover plant, they died. Finally, it was discovered that the death was not due to any viral illness, bacterial illness or any other thing, but it was due to the cattle consuming the moldy type of sweet clover. Moldy is something which is rich in moisture, which is humidified, and which is actually infected with a fungus, and there is scope for fermentation. And whatever this plant I told you, Fabaceae related plant, Fabaceae family related plant, it has nitrogen fixing bacteria in it, so rhizobium. So that bacteria can cause fermentation when the humid environment is prevailing, and that led to formation of certain compounds that have significant structural analogy to vitamin K. They interfered with the function of vitamin K and they caused bleeding tendency in the animal. The discovery finally was done by Carl Paul Link. He isolated that chemical and he called that chemical, which was structurally resemble vitamin K, as dicumarol. And this was done in the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation laboratory, and therefore the drug was therefore marketed subsequently as warfarin, because Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, acronym if you take WARF, and the compound that was isolated from there, from the sweet clover that was contaminated with fungus, and the bacteria in the fermentation process produced dicumarol, which resembles vitamin K and therefore interferes with the vitamin K's function competitively and therefore led to bleeding tendencies, was dicumarol. Just as the cattle died by taking it, these people then they marketed, the people who researched this dicumarol marketed this as a rat poison, and the person holding the bottle in his hand on the right of your PowerPoint screen image, Carl Paul Link, he is credited with the discovery of this chemical. So if you see the clotting cascade, there is an intrinsic pathway, extrinsic pathway. On the left hand side we see factor 12 initiating the cascade, and on the right side we see factor 7 through tissue damage mediating the pathway. So on the left hand side, that is through 12, is the intrinsic pathway, on the right hand side that is the extrinsic pathway. Finally you see the common pathway from factor 10 onwards, and factor 10 when it gets activated converts prothrombin to thrombin, and then the thrombin converts fibrinogen to fibrin, and also thrombin activates the fibrin stabilizing factor, which converts fibrin to fibrin polymer, and therefore a clot formation template is initiated. So this is the real system of simplified system of evaluation for the clotting to happen in our body. Now therefore, what could be the targets for anticoagulation? The targets for anticoagulation could be at the factor 12, 11, 9, 8, 7, 5, 2, anywhere. So these are all the ways in which the factors could be targeted. So I will go to that in detail later. So now let us see, why did we discuss vitamin K here? basically the vitamin K, the bleeding, the deficiency, all of it, because whatever vitamin K's functions are there, the anticoagulation also interferes with the actions of vitamin K, because vitamin K is related to coagulation. If you want to get anticoagulant effect, you may also interfere with the vitamin K. Now what does vitamin K do in our body to result in coagulation? The vitamin K actually plays an important role, as you see here, in gamma carboxylation of glutamic acid residues. So factors 2, factor 7, factor 9, factor 10 related to clotting are synthesized in the liver. When they are synthesized in the liver, they are in the form of zymogens, inactive form, but they later get converted into active form. To get converted into active form, they undergo one step called as gamma carboxylation of the glutamic acid residues. So here on the left hand side, you can see the glutamic acid residues, and the glutamic acid residues are then carboxylated, that is carbon dioxide is there, oxygen is there, and 2 electrons are donated, and the glutamic acid residues then become gamma carboxy glutamic acid through gamma glutamyl carboxylase catalyzed reaction. So here you can see CH2 COO minus, CH2 COO minus calcium. So you can see the COO minus is integrated into this along with the original COO minus that was here. So this is carboxylation that has happened. Additional carboxyl group has been introduced into this glutamic acid residue. Now this factor 2, 7, 9, 10, when they undergo gamma carboxylation, they become active. What is meant by they become active? They get the ability to bind to phospholipids, they get the ability to bind to calcium. When they get the ability to bind to calcium, when they get the ability to bind to phospholipids, they can trigger the clotting cascade. So that is how normally the factor 2, 7, 9, 10 are inactive. They cannot create the cascade of clotting to become activated, but subsequently when they become gamma carboxylated through the gamma glutamyl carboxylase enzyme, they are capable of initiating the clotting cascade. Now this gamma carboxylation reaction, the 2 electrons that are donated, now who is donating the 2 electrons? The 2 electrons are actually donated by vitamin K hydroquinone. Now vitamin K hydroquinone, how does it come from? Where does it come from? Vitamin K hydroquinone comes from vitamin K epoxide. So vitamin K epoxide, how does it become vitamin K hydroquinone? Vitamin K epoxide in our body, which is oxidized form, becomes vitamin K hydroquinone, which is reduced form, by gaining 2 electrons through the action of vitamin K epoxide reductase. We can also call it as vitamin K oxidoreductase, because epoxide is oxidized form. Therefore, instead of vitamin K epoxide reductase, we can also call it as vitamin K oxidoreductase. VKOR is the enzyme. Now vitamin K oxidase reductase enzyme, it converts the vitamin K epoxide to vitamin K hydroquinone, and this vitamin K hydroquinone then gives 2 electrons to carboxylate the glutamic acid residues under the influence of the enzyme gamma glutamyl carboxylase, and converts the glutamic acid residues into gamma carboxyl glutamic acid. So this is how activation of inactive factors 2, 7, 9, 10 happens. But if you carefully look at this, each time factor 2, 7, 9, 10 glutamic acid residue becomes carboxylated, hydroquinone becomes epoxide form. Vitamin K hydroquinone becomes vitamin K epoxide, that is reduced vitamin K becomes oxidized vitamin K. So restore the vitamin K in the reduced form, continuously vitamin K epoxide should become vitamin K hydroquinone, and this process of vitamin K epoxide becoming hydroquinone cyclically is ensured by activity of vitamin K oxidoreductase. If you block the vitamin K oxidoreductase, you will not have enough amount of vitamin K hydroquinone. If we don't have enough amount of vitamin K hydroquinone, glutamic acid residues of factor 2, factor 7, factor 9, factor 10 cannot be carboxylated. If they are not carboxylated, the factors 2, factor 7, factor 9, factor 10 cannot participate in the coagulation cascade, because then they cannot get activated, they cannot bind to calcium and phospholipids. So how vitamin K antagonists are responsible for anticoagulant effect is by preventing the activity of enzyme vitamin K oxidoreductase. And how vitamin K is responsible for coagulation? Vitamin K is responsible for coagulation by making available enough amount of vitamin K that can become vitamin K hydroquinone from vitamin K epoxide, and continue this cycle of activation of glutamic acid residues into their active form. So understanding vitamin K is important because vitamin K is responsible for coagulation, and understanding vitamin K is also important because there is a target for anticoagulant action in the pathway catalyzed by gamma glutamyl carboxylase and also vitamin K epoxide reductase. However, our target is not gamma glutamyl carboxylase, our target is vitamin K oxidoreductase. because in PG entrances they will ask you vitamin K antagonists act on gamma glutamyl carboxylase or vitamin K oxidoreductase. Vitamin K antagonists act on vitamin K oxidoreductase. So now that we understand how vitamin K is available in nature, how vitamin K is absorbed, how vitamin K shows some physiological function, now let us go to the drug which actually interferes with the vitamin K oxidoreductase. So the vitamin K oxidoreductase is inhibited by this drug called warfarin, which we saw initially in the cattle deaths, and how that cattle deaths led to research on the compound, and therefore warfarin was marketed. Now if we go back to vitamin K and see, if someone has vitamin deficiency, how do you treat vitamin deficiency? For example, there is a neonate. Now we know neonate has vitamin K deficiency. And how do you treat? Do you give orally? Do you give parenterally? Orally, the rate of absorption and the bioavailability are not really well established for vitamin K. And vitamin K, especially in the neonates, can trigger something called as vitamin K deficiency bleeding disease. It is also called as VKDBD, vitamin K deficiency bleeding disease. Vitamin K deficiency bleeding disease. And there are three different manifestations of this in the neonates. Vitamin K deficiency bleeding disease. It can happen within the first 24 hours, and that is not possible to be treated. It can happen just immediately within a few hours after birth. That cannot be prevented, that cannot be easily treated by doing any intervention in the mother. There is something called as a classic vitamin K deficiency in the neonate. That classic deficiency is where it happens anytime after 24 hours, but in the first 1 week itself. And there is another late manifestation that will develop between 2 to 12 weeks, and that is called as the delayed manifestation of vitamin K deficiency bleeding disorder. So vitamin K deficiency bleeding disorders in the neonates could be of three types. The first one, which doesn't give us much scope for prevention, is the one that develops in the first 24 hours. Why it happens is, for example, if the mother is receiving for tuberculosis drugs like rifampicin, if the mother is receiving anti-epileptic drug like phenytoin or phenobarbital, as we discussed, those medicines will cause increased turnover of vitamin K, and therefore whatever little vitamin K is able to cross from the mother into the neonate, even that will not be there. So the neonate will be born with dramatically low vitamin K, unlike other neonates. All neonates have low vitamin K, but the mother who has been on phenobarbital, the mother who has been on rifampicin, the mother who has been on phenytoin, or mother who has been receiving broad spectrum antibiotics, their neonates will have even more dramatically low vitamin K, and that may lead to severe bleeding tendency in them. Then the classic vitamin K deficiency bleeding disease in the neonates, which is manifest after 24 hours but within the first 7 days, that will lead to GI hemorrhages mostly, and bruising in different parts of the body leading to petechiae, then purpura and ecchymosis. The third one, the delayed one, which develops between 2 to 12 weeks, is very severe. It may develop not only in the form of a GI bleed but also with intracranial bleeding. So that is very, very serious. Fortunately for us, except for the early form, the classic form and the late form can easily be prevented, and that is by giving 1 milligrams of vitamin K1 intramuscularly to all the neonates at the time of birth. So anterolateral aspect of the thigh, 1 milligram of vitamin K is given to all neonates in many parts of the world, including India. And the preparation that is available for vitamin K is 1 milligram per ml concentration and also 0.5 milligram per ml concentration. Now why do we have these two concentrations available? Because if the child, if the neonate for example is having a birth weight of greater than 1 kilogram, that is more than 1000 gram, the dose is 1 milligram. And if the birth weight of the neonate is less than 1 kilogram, that is less than 1000 gram, then the dose that we use is 0.5 milligram. It is given intramuscularly and the anterolateral aspect of the thigh with a 26 gauge needle and 1 ml syringe. It is a national protocol to administer all newborns at birth with 1 milligram dose for all those with a birth weight greater than 1 kilogram and 0.5 milligram for all neonates with a birth weight less than 1 kilogram. So this is very important to save the neonates from the complications that may happen due to the classic variety of the vitamin K deficiency bleeding disease and the delayed variety or variant of the vitamin K deficiency bleeding disease. Now, malabsorption syndromes. If some person has celiac disease, tropical sprue, and someone has undergone resection of the gastrointestinal tract due to intestinal adhesion secondary to tuberculosis or some other condition, then in such condition again injection can be administered to these individuals or oral supplementation can be given, but the oral supplementation will not work if the malabsorption is significant. Therefore, parenteral administration is preferred. For adults, generally the dose is 10 milligrams intramuscularly. So, adult preparation has 10 milligrams per ml. So, 1 ml if we give, it is 10 milligram. But the 10 milligram per ml preparation should not be used in neonates. It is a recommended formulation for neonates as 1 milligram per ml and 0.5 milligram per ml. All the subcenters, PHCs and tertiary care hospitals in this country have that 1 milligram per ml and 0.5 milligram per ml formulation in different places of our country, so that the neonates do not get this concentrated 10 milligram per ml. You may always argue that 10 milligram per ml, if you take 0.1 ml also, it will be still 1 milligram, but then the 0.1 ml is so small that it may not really go into the muscle, it may be actually dissipated while administering in the subcutaneous tissue itself. So therefore, we do not give the 10 milligram per ml formulation, we give only the 1 milligram per ml or 0.5 milligram per ml depending on the body weight of the neonate at birth. Inflammatory bowel disease, again 10 milligrams intramuscularly. Then obstructive liver disease, again in those individuals also, because inflammatory bowel disease, obstructive liver disease, malabsorption syndrome, if you put them under the same bracket, they all come into the category of malabsorptions. Prolonged use of antibiotics, again because the bacterial flora are altered, therefore parenteral administration is better in those people. Intake of liver enzyme inducing drugs, in these individuals oral can be given because oral stores will try to replenish the body stores of vitamin K. However, parenteral option is always available. Hyperthyroidism, oral supplementation can work. Liver disease, oral or parenteral. Dietary deficiency, increasing the dietary sources and also, for example, giving oral formulation may work. Individuals on oral anticoagulants. Now, individuals on oral anticoagulants, you have to be very careful if they develop vitamin K deficiency manifestations, because vitamin K deficiency could be either asymptomatic or symptomatic. If it is asymptomatic, there is a different line of approach. If it is symptomatic, there is a different line of approach. That details we will go to when we reach the vitamin K related anticoagulants which we use in therapeutics and see how to monitor and how to judge at what point of time, whenever someone is receiving oral anticoagulants, what is the intervention that we need to do. So the first and the most important part here, if out of vitamin K deficiency, if I am not able to convey convincingly one message across to you, if you forget from point number 2 to point number 10, it is okay. But if you forget point number 1, which I have already told, and the point number 10, which I am going to discuss later, it's really not much useful to discuss either vitamin K or anything else, because vitamin K, of all the things in the neonates, it is almost considered total negligence if we do not give at birth 1 milligram intramuscularly for all neonates with birth weight greater than 1 kilogram, and to all neonates less than 1 kilogram at birth, if the weight is there, at the 0.5 milligram injection intramuscularly in the anterolateral aspect of thigh with a 1 ml syringe, that is minimum that you should know. And what would happen if you don't give is the probability that the vitamin K deficiency bleeding disease can happen in the neonates who do not get the injection is 81 times more than the neonates who get the infection. So that is the real risk. But however, is this problem really very big? We do not know, because in all the countries of the world, wherever the programs are implemented for vitamin K administration to neonates at birth, the bleeding tendency disease is very, very low, and those countries where it is not, the tendency is very high. So therefore, it is now a worldwide practice in all developing nations and developed nations of the world to give all the neonates at birth vitamin K. If someone asks vitamin K use, though you can tell everything from malabsorption to dietary deficiency and in between the liver diseases, the antibiotics, the liver enzyme inducing drugs, the hyperthyroidism, I will still recommend the first one should be at birth neonates. If we don't tell that, it reflects very badly on our understanding of vitamin K disease deficiency and the national program that is there to prevent the neonates from vulnerability of GI bleed and the central nervous system bleed and leading to severe mortality. Now if we look at the extrinsic pathway and the intrinsic pathways, factor 12 becoming 12a, 11 becoming 11a, 9 becoming 9a, then 10 becoming 10a. Crucial is this 10 becoming 10a. The 10 becomes 10a, then everything really starts getting accelerated from there. Then prothrombin becomes thrombin, thrombin converts fibrinogen to fibrin. Also thrombin converts fibrin stabilizing factor to its active form, and therefore the fibrin monomer that is formed under the action of thrombin, the monomer becomes a polymer. Why the intrinsic pathway and extrinsic pathway are shown simultaneously is because the subtle difference between the two pathways is whenever there is a massive tissue injury and the tissue proteins are released, that will lead to an extrinsic pathway activation almost immediately. Whereas not really any type of big structural injury to the tissues of our body, but subtle differences in the way the blood flows in the vasculature, small erosions of the endothelium here and there can trigger the intrinsic pathway. So small types of silent changes in the vascular system, when the blood flow turbulence is minorly altered and it is not a real big impact in terms of tissue destruction, intrinsic pathway gets activated. But when the tissue destruction is there clearly, for example someone falls onto the ground and gets an abrasion which is deep, someone gets a laceration, someone gets a stab, it's really the extrinsic. But at that time the force is so much that the extrinsic pathway actually triggers the intrinsic pathway also. So the rule is whenever extrinsic pathway is triggered, almost always intrinsic is also triggered. But when the intrinsic is triggered, it is unlikely that most of the time extrinsic will be triggered. But irrespective of whether it is intrinsic pathway or extrinsic pathway, both of them finally have to follow the common pathway, which is through factor 10. If you see the number of steps in the intrinsic pathway, they are a little more than the number of steps in the extrinsic pathway. Therefore the time taken for the intrinsic pathway to result in thrombosis is little longer than the pathway mediated by tissue damage, that is the extrinsic pathway. So now if you look at warfarin, this warfarin is an antagonist of vitamin K oxidoreductase. The vitamin K oxidoreductase enzyme, as we know from the actions of vitamin K itself, that vitamin K epoxide conversion to vitamin K hydroquinone is catalyzed by it. And if you inhibit this enzyme, vitamin K hydroquinone will not be formed. If vitamin K hydroquinone is not formed, it cannot donate the electrons. If it cannot donate the electrons, the gamma carboxylation of glutamic acid residues at factor 2, 7, 9, 10 in the liver will not happen. And when factor 2, 7, 9, 10 related activation doesn't happen, there will be a problem with the coagulation cascade. That is the mechanism of action of vitamin K antagonist warfarin. The cattle that I showed which died in Wisconsin after eating the sweet clover is basically because of the compound coumarin, and warfarin is a congener of that coumarin, and it structurally resembles the vitamin K. Therefore the vitamin K epoxide reductase enzyme or the vitamin K oxidoreductase enzyme is fooled into believing that this warfarin is like vitamin K epoxide, and therefore it will bind to it. So what happens is it will then not be able to convert the vitamin K epoxide to hydroquinone, and that will lead to factors 2, 7, 9, 10 remaining unactivated and not being able to participate in the coagulation cascade. So all the people that take warfarin may not respond equally to warfarin because there may be a genetic variation. If people ask you, give examples of pharmacogenetics, one important aspect of pharmacogenetics that you can give an example straight away is from warfarin. Warfarin will show different effects in different individuals. Why? There could be multiple reasons. People may absorb warfarin differently, people may metabolize warfarin differently, people may excrete warfarin differently, but the simple most important pharmacodynamic reason is that the vitamin K oxidoreductase enzyme is genetically determined and therefore is different in different individuals. It shows polymorphism. So some individuals have a type of vitamin K oxidoreductase which is easily bound to warfarin, and some individuals have vitamin K oxidoreductase that does not easily bind to warfarin. So if some person is having a vitamin K oxidoreductase which does not easily bind to warfarin, whatever warfarin dose we may give, it will produce less amount of anticoagulant effect. On the other hand, if someone's vitamin K oxidoreductase is highly sensitive to warfarin, they will develop so much amount of anticoagulation that the person may have bleeding tendency. Please remember, vitamin K is responsible for coagulation, and vitamin K antagonist like warfarin will be responsible for anticoagulation. So vitamin K is responsible for clotting, vitamin K K antagonist is responsible for preventing the clotting, therefore increasing the risk of bleeding. So when warfarin is bound to vitamin K oxidoreductase, which is very high affinity for the warfarin, then there will be excessive bleeding tendency in that individual. On the other hand, if you have given warfarin to some individual from some therapeutic purpose, and if that individual's vitamin K oxidoreductase is having very low affinity for binding to warfarin, warfarin will not be able to show its action, so there will not be any therapeutic benefit that the person will get. So why some people develop different responses to warfarin as compared to others is all primarily determined by the polymorphism in the structure and affinity of vitamin K oxidoreductase to warfarin. If you want to simplifiedly see this, vitamin K oxidized form becomes vitamin K reduced form, and when vitamin K oxidized becomes reduced, that reduced form again becomes oxidized. So when the reduced form becomes oxidized, how is it becoming oxidized? Because it is donating its electrons to someone. Now who is taking those electrons? The clotting factor precursors, that is 2, 7, 9, 10 are taking those electrons, and the clotting factors become activated. So what does warfarin do? Warfarin will prevent the conversion of the oxidized vitamin K to reduced vitamin K. We need the reduced vitamin K. Now reduced vitamin K is reduced by vitamin K oxidoreductase. If you block that by warfarin, the vitamin K oxidized cannot become reduced. So that is a simplified way. Most of the time in the exam this is how people draw. So therefore I put it, because if you think that sir this is all complicated we can't put, or if you say this is all complicated we can't draw, at least this much is I think comfortable and easily possible for people, and also quite sufficient without spending much time on things that are more dramatic rather than functionally useful. Now again this is the representation of mechanism of action. This is even more clear because I have put in factors 2, factor 7, factor 9, factor 10 here. So factor 2, factor 7, factor 9, factor 10 under the influence of gamma glutamyl carboxylase with the help of reduced vitamin K become active forms 2, 7, 9, 10, and this reduced vitamin K in the process becomes oxidized vitamin K. To maintain this conversion of the inactive clotting factors to active clotting factors on a continuous basis, the oxidized vitamin K should continuously become reduced vitamin K. And for this oxidized vitamin K to become reduced vitamin K on a continuous basis, we require the action of an enzyme called vitamin K oxidoreductase, and that can be blocked by warfarin. Now look at this diagram why I have put here. Warfarin exists as a racemic mixture of S-warfarin and R-warfarin, and people have done the studies on both S-warfarin and R-warfarin, and they found that S-warfarin is really at least 5 times more potent than R-warfarin. And the metabolism of S-warfarin is also different than the R-warfarin. So when you give warfarin, you may be giving warfarin, but actually it has equal mixture of S-warfarin and R-warfarin. So half of the warfarin that you give is actually metabolized by CYP2C9, and half of the warfarin that you give is metabolized by 3A4 and 1A2. So there is another reason why some people have variation in response to warfarin. This is again example of pharmacogenetics. The previous one was a pharmacodynamic type of response change. Here also there is a pharmacokinetic type of response change. If you see, some individual may have a polymorphism of CYP2C9, and that individual may have low levels of CYP2C9. If the individual has low levels of CYP2C9, warfarin will not be adequately metabolized. So whatever warfarin dose we are giving will be too large for that individual, and the too large a dose may lead to bleeding tendency because warfarin is an anticoagulant. On the other hand, if someone has a highly active functional form of CYP2C9, they will rapidly metabolize the warfarin, and if they rapidly metabolize the warfarin, then the therapeutic function of warfarin will not be fulfilled. So therapeutically it will be a failure. So the drug interactions are there with the drugs which may be inducing CYP2C9 and which will be inhibiting CYP2C9, and also to some extent the drugs which inhibit CYP3A4 and the drugs which inhibit CYP1A2 and also induce 3A4 and 1A2. So this is about, so if you recollect, I told a little while ago, if there is a individual who is on phenytoin, who is on phenobarbital, who is on rifampicin, then warfarin's effect will come down because 3A4 and 1A2 are induced. 2C9 is also induced by these enzyme inducers like phenobarbital, phenytoin and rifampicin. They induce these enzymes. If they induce these enzymes, they will accelerately metabolize warfarin, and therefore what happens is the person will have less effect of warfarin. On the other hand, if I use drugs like erythromycin, metronidazole, they inhibit CYP3A4, 1A2 and 2C9, amiodarone. They are the drugs which inhibit these enzymes. Which you inhibit these enzymes, the warfarin level goes up. So these are the drug interactions with warfarin. One of the important reasons why warfarin is not really very safe drug to prescribe is warfarin is not really predictable. Depending on the genetic variations in the individual, the response will differ. There is multitude of reasons for the genetic differences to happen. One is the genetic differences could be happening at the level of the vitamin K oxidoreductase affinity for warfarin itself, and the other one is there could be polymorphisms in the enzymes 2C9, 3A4, 1A2, which will either lead to excessive effect of warfarin or low effect of warfarin. So either it could lead to bleeding tendency or it could lead to therapeutic failure. So one important reason why warfarin is really very carefully to be monitored before stabilizing the dose and giving it on a regular basis is because of these genetic variations. There is large inter-individual variations in the effects of warfarin. Now warfarin and acinocumarol. So now we saw warfarin has certain limitations. What were the limitations? Warfarin has limitations because the vitamin K oxidoreductase may have different affinity, CYP3A4 interactions are there, CYP1A2 interactions are there, 2C9 interactions are there, and another thing is warfarin has a relatively slow onset of action. When you take warfarin, it will take for the initial effect to be seen itself at least 2 to 4 hours, whereas acinocumarol's effects may be seen in 1 to 2 hours. Another thing is warfarin has a long duration of action, 3 to 5 days, whereas acinocumarol has short duration of action, 2 to 3 days. Therefore, the other anticoagulant which is manufactured apart from warfarin and which is widely used therapeutically because of its favorable pharmacokinetic profile is acinocumarol, and the variation in terms of the CYP2C9, 3A4 and 1A2 affecting acinocumarol is little less than that of warfarin. So why do we have acinocumarol? Why not just only warfarin? These are the reasons. So whenever someone made some drug, there must have been a strong rationale behind it. They would not have just done it for the sake of doing it. So therefore, we need to understand very clearly, if someone asks what is the difference between warfarin and acinocumarol, rapid onset, short duration is acinocumarol, relatively slow onset as compared to acinocumarol, and relatively long duration is warfarin. And if you take genetic variation affecting the outcomes of the drug, warfarin is more vulnerable to genetic variations. Therefore, inter-individual variations in the response to warfarin will be more than the inter-individual variations in response to acinocumarol. Now look at the warfarin drug interactions list. This is only a very small list. If you pick up most drugs, they will have invariably some or the other interactions with warfarin. Therefore, warfarin, because of all these drug interactions, is not really a very safe drug to prescribe. Amiodarone, ciprofloxacin, metronidazole, fluconazole, fluoxamine, phenylbutazone, take erythromycin, voriconazole, all of these drugs, they inhibit the metabolism of warfarin, and therefore warfarin level is elevated. I would recommend people to remember at least two important things. Amiodarone, because warfarin is used in people with cardiovascular diseases, amiodarone is also used in people with cardiovascular diseases. Lot of people are likely to have a co-administration of amiodarone with warfarin, and therefore amiodarone will then raise the level of warfarin, and much more effect of warfarin will be got than the usual dose. So person comes with bleeding tendencies, and that bleeding tendencies will not be any simple bleeding tendencies. It could be massive gastrointestinal hemorrhage, it could be intracranial bleed. So we should be very careful. Ciprofloxacin is a widely used antibiotic, and people use ciprofloxacin that will inhibit the metabolism of warfarin, and warfarin lead to bleeding tendency. Metronidazole also a very widely used antibiotic. Again, metronidazole, if it is given along with warfarin, that may lead to severe elevations in the warfarin levels and bleeding tendencies. Erythromycin is also widely used. Ethanol actually induces and to some extent inhibits 1A2. Now you will get a doubt, sir, what is the statement induces, inhibits? Are you confused, or it is a slip of the tongue? It is not a slip of the tongue, it is not confusion, it is a very systematic way. Alcohol intake acutely is an inhibitor of 1A2. Alcohol in the long term is an inducer of 1A2. When it is on a technology platform that we are discussing, it is very difficult for me to be just looking at the slide and without knowing anyone understood or not. So sometimes I try to hold myself back when speaking from the pace with which I usually tell, and that leads to a little bit of slow down of the presentation. But that doesn't mean that you should get confused with ethanol here. Ethanol in the low dose is an inhibitor. For short term it is an inhibitor. Chronically, if someone is taking ethanol, that becomes an inducer. So therefore ethanol 1A2, when it is shown in the bracket, acutely if someone is ingesting, for a small duration if someone is ingesting, that will lead to inhibition of the 1A2. Someone is taking ethanol for a long time, that will induce the 1A2. And on the right hand side, if you see, there are some compounds like rifampicin, I told in the beginning, phenytoin, phenobarbital, I have told, they not only accelerate metabolism of vitamin K, anything that looks like vitamin K also they accelerate the metabolism. So warfarin after all looks like vitamin K. So rifampicin, phenytoin, phenobarbital, they all accelerate metabolism of vitamin K as well as that of warfarin. Now don't go into that nitpicking type of a habit and see, sir, if vitamin K metabolism is also accelerated and warfarin metabolism is also accelerated, will there be a balance? That depends on the endogenous stores of vitamin K in the individual. Most vitamin K in our body is only very delicately balanced. We don't have the luxury of having lot of vitamin K. So what happens is, in an individual who is taking warfarin and who is taking rifampicin or phenytoin or phenobarbital, I agree that vitamin K will be rapidly metabolized and warfarin will also be rapidly metabolized, but the rate of vitamin K depletion will be much faster than the rate of warfarin depletion. It will lead to still some type of a bleeding risk. However, it could lead to therapeutic failure also in the initial days, because if rifampicin, phenytoin, phenobarbital are given, those drugs will accelerate the metabolism of warfarin, the warfarin levels will fall and that will lead to failure of therapy with warfarin. Cigarette smoking is an inhibitor of warfarin or inducer of warfarin. If you see, cigarette smoking, as we discussed last time, induces the metabolism of clopidogrel also to its active form. So similarly here cigarette smoking will induce 1A2 and it induces the metabolism of 2C9 and therefore warfarin. So therefore cigarette smoking is a inducer of several enzymes including 1A2, 2C9, 2B6, 2D6, as we saw for clopidogrel also. Cigarette smokers have better benefit with clopidogrel. Here the better benefit will not be there. Why it will not be there? Because clopidogrel required activation, therefore it required the enzymes. Here it is not requiring any activation, its active form is becoming inactive. So warfarin becomes inactive if it is metabolized. So therefore cigarette smoking causes inactivation. So if someone is smoking for a long time and that individual is taking warfarin also, then his effect of warfarin will be very, very low. First of all, cigarette smokers are vulnerable for cardiovascular disease, and for some cardiovascular disease, the indications which I will discuss soon, if you give warfarin, if the person continues to smoke, the effect of warfarin will come down. Now, indications for warfarin. In whom do we use warfarin? Because I have told about warfarin and things like that, so you need to understand why do we even use warfarin. So there is two different type of clots. One is the clot that is formed in the arteries and the clot that is formed in the veins. They are two real different entities to some extent. Basically because the clot that is formed in the arteries is primarily because of the endothelial erosion. There is a high pressure circulation, and because of endothelial erosion, the platelets then go and bind to the subendothelial collagen through the von Willebrand factor and the GP1B receptor, and platelet plug is formed. So primarily trigger there is the platelets getting adhered to the subendothelial collagen. Whereas in the venous circulation, which is a low pressure circulation, it is basically the Virchow triad that plays an important role. Virchow triad says that whenever there is sluggish circulation, it will lead to hypercoagulability of the blood, and it will also lead to endothelial injury, and that will lead to clot formation. That is the Virchow triad. And therefore, because the mesh that is formed under the influence of coagulation cascade that drives the formation of fibrinogen to fibrin, that fibrin polymer, when it is formed, the fibrin polymer will trap RBC and the other cells into it, but it will not trap much of platelets into it. Whereas the arterial thrombus is primarily platelet rich, whereas the venous thrombus is primarily RBC rich. Therefore the venous thrombus, not at all surprising, looks reddish in nature, whereas the arterial thrombus look pale. Why this is? Because the mesh that is formed by fibrin is able to trap larger cells. It will trap the RBC, it will trap the WBC, but it will not be able to trap the platelets. If you recollect from your knowledge of physiology and to some extent pathology, the smallest of all the cells in the blood are the platelets. Their diameter, if you look at, 2 to 3 microns. So when the fibrin meshwork is formed, the platelets will not get easily trapped into it. What will get trapped into is the larger cells. The larger cells are the WBC. The WBC size will range from 12 microns to 15 microns to 20 microns. So they all get trapped. And if you look at the RBC, at least 6 to 7 microns, so they also get trapped. Platelets being just 2 to 3 micron, they don't get easily trapped. So therefore the venous thrombus is primarily red in nature because fibrin meshwork that is formed through the intrinsic and extrinsic pathway traps the RBC and WBC, whereas the arterial thrombus primarily traps the platelets. Now if someone has DVT and secondary to DVT is deep vein thrombosis and PE is pulmonary thromboembolism. Now someone who has deep vein thrombosis or pulmonary thromboembolism, and when you know that the cause is reversible, for example, if I have been admitted to a hospital because I have bilateral tibia fracture because I met with an accident, in that case what happens is I will be bedridden for a long time. When we are bedridden, there will be sluggish circulation, hypercoagulability of blood and endothelial injury. I fulfill all the requirements stated by Virchow, so therefore I am at risk of developing deep vein thrombosis, and the deep vein thrombosis can then actually spread to the pulmonary system and I may develop pulmonary thromboembolism, because we all know the venous system primarily drains from everywhere into the pulmonary system. So the thrombus also will then likely extend into the pulmonary system and therefore the person may have pulmonary thromboembolism. If someone has a reversible cause, this is a reversible cause, someone who is admitted in the hospital for a surgery of the tibia which have been fractured in a trauma, he will not be forever in that condition, he will finally recover. So it is a reversible cause. So for 3 months continuously warfarin is recommended in those individuals. And for those individuals with an unprovoked DVT or pulmonary thromboembolism, unprovoked, so we don't really know the cause of the DVT or the PE, unknown. So there we have to give it for long time, at least 6 months, and then after 6 months the condition has to be evaluated, and if we can identify a cause, we may reduce the dose or taper it off. But if we do not identify a cause, the physician is fully entitled to extend the therapy as he deems fit. And another thing is, for people with 2 episodes of unprovoked DVT, so not only 1 episode of unprovoked unidentifiable cause related DVT or PE, multiple times it is happening. For example, first time I came, the doctor searched for a cause, they could not identify a cause and they put me on treatment for 6 months, and then they said okay, let us stop the treatment and see. But after 2 months again I came back with another episode of DVT and again they could not find any cause. So this is the second time that I have caught a DVT or a pulmonary thromboembolism and the cause has not yet been identified. Therefore again long-term therapy is indicated. Really speaking, whatever is clinically required is this slide related information. This is the practice principle of warfarin. Now if you know warfarin about the cascade, the 2,7,9,10, the gamma glutamyl carboxylic acid residues, the oxidoreductase, the 2C9, to some extent it may or may not help or harm any patient, but not knowing this is going to make life worse for a lot of people who need to be treated appropriately. Because if you treat more than 3 months when it is not indicated, it will lead to bleeding tendency. If you don't treat for more than 3 months when it is actually indicated, you may actually risk the life of the patient, because that deep vein thrombosis may extend into pulmonary system, may cause pulmonary thromboembolism, the person may die. So therefore this is really the crux of the warfarin. So how do we give warfarin? Warfarin is given orally. How much is it absorbed? About 50-70% is absorbed. And again there is erratic absorption. A lot of people absorb differently. Now warfarin is quite well absorbed in the presence or absence of the food. So food doesn't interfere with absorption of warfarin. After getting absorbed, what does it do? It goes to the liver through the portal circulation, and in the liver it interferes with the vitamin K oxidoreductase. Therefore the factor 2,7,9,10 cannot be activated and the coagulation related the active components will not be available. Therefore it acts as an anticoagulant. Now warfarin is a inhibitor of the activation of factors 2,7,9,10. Now for that you need to know warfarin, when it is acting, will it produce immediate effect? No. Why it will not produce immediate effect? Because it is going to inhibit the activation of factors. But if I start taking the warfarin today, I might have had factors 2,7,9,10 synthesized all the while just before taking the medicine also. So warfarin will prevent this activation of the factors that are synthesized now, but they cannot block the factors that have been already activated before taking warfarin. So until those factors are depleted, I will not be able to get the full effect of warfarin. So I don't know if you got it clearly. Warfarin, as I start giving, from that point onwards, whatever factor 2,7,9,10 has to be activated, it will stop the activation of those factors. But before I have given warfarin, till that time also, every moment my body has been manufacturing factor 2,7,9,10. So they are there. So they will still be able to coagulate my blood. So therefore, if I start warfarin immediately, I may not get the anticoagulant effect immediately. because the factors that have already been synthesized before giving warfarin would still serve the purpose of coagulation. Now, how long will my factors that have been synthesized last? If I have taken warfarin at 10 am today, till 9:59 am, my body was synthesizing the 2, 7, 9, 10. So, how long will they last? So, my factor 2 will last for 60 hours. Half-life is 60 hours, not even the exact duration. The half-life of factor 2 is 60 hours. The half-life of factor 10 is about 42 hours. The half-life of factor 6 is about 7 hours. The half-life of factor 9 is about 24 hours. So if you see of all of them, the half-life of factor 2 is 60 hours. So 2, 7, 9, 10. Factor 2 has 60 hours half-life. Factor 7 has 6 hours half-life. Factor 9 has 12 hours half-life. Factor 10 has 24 hours half-life. So of all of them, prothrombin, nature is kind, because nature knows that whatever is the stimulus for the clot to be formed, the most important thing is prothrombin becoming thrombin, whether it is intrinsic pathway or extrinsic pathway, and therefore the factor 2, which is essential for the coagulation, is having the longest half-life of all others. And that is why in the PG entrances they ask the half-life of the clotting factors of all, which is having the longest. The warfarin's action therefore will be seen on which drug late is the factor 2, which will be actually lasting for a long time, because the half-life is about 60 hours. Now half-life is itself 60 hours, so you can imagine that it will take at least 1 to 3 days for the effect of warfarin to start. Ideally it will take at least, to start it will take 1 to 3 days, peak effect will come in 5 days. So warfarin's effect will start in 1 to 3 days, peak effect will come in 5 days. So if I come with an emergency pulmonary thromboembolism, if I come with emergency DVT, in that condition if I give warfarin, it is not going to help, because it will start its action in 1 to 3 days and it will peak in 3 to 5 days. So in the interim period we give warfarin with heparin, simultaneously give heparin and warfarin, and as you near 3rd day, 4th day, gradually taper off heparin and continue warfarin. So that is the ideal strategy. So warfarin in emergency may not help. So the rest of the things related to warfarin and rest of the things related to the other anticoagulants we will discuss in the afternoon. A quick review of vitamin K and warfarin in just 3 minutes I will complete. Vitamin K available as vitamin K1, vitamin K2, vitamin K3. K2 there is no therapeutic value because K2 is all synthesized by the bacteria in our gut. Vitamin K1 natural abundant source. 2 important sources, cabbage you can recollect, broccoli and any other green leaf vegetable including spinach are rich in vitamin K. Of course the animal sources are the animal liver, egg yolk has some amount of it, and also fermented foods like cheese have it. How is it given? Both orally and parenterally. Now parenterally if it is given for neonates, the most important thing is 0.5 milligrams per ml for those less than 1 kg. For those above 1 kg at birth we give 1 milligram. Now how does it get absorbed? Vitamin K is fat soluble. It gets absorbed in the jejunum primarily, and by what mechanism? It is by an active transport mechanism. It enters into the lacteals, and after entering into the lacteals passes through the thoracic duct as chylomicrons, and those chylomicrons they are then taken up by the liver. Then chylomicrons will not only contain the lipids, but the chylomicron will also contain the vitamin K that the person has taken in the diet. And the chylomicrons will then be metabolized in the liver, converted to VLDL. VLDL will be secreted in the liver, and then from the liver, and it will get converted to LDL and IDL as it passes through the bloodstream through the action of lipoprotein lipase. Different tissues in our body will have LDL receptors. So LDL will carry the vitamin K to different tissues in the body, including the bone. So vitamin K has an important role in the bone that in the afternoon I will discuss. So now you know how it is absorbed. And who is likely to develop vitamin K deficiency also we discussed. People with malabsorption syndrome, people with broad spectrum antibiotic usage for a long time, and people with hepatic obstructive disease, people with cirrhotic type of liver disease, people who have hyperthyroidism, people who are taking microsomal enzyme inducers, and people who receive vitamin K related oral anticoagulants. Then what is this warfarin related to? Warfarin is related to vitamin K because it structurally resembles vitamin K, therefore it blocks the vitamin K oxidoreductase, and it is a reversible type of inhibition, competitive. So if you give large dose of vitamin K, warfarin effect can be reversed. So is warfarin short acting or long acting? Long acting. Is it slow acting or rapid acting? It is slow acting. How much time does it take? 1 to 3 days. Is it well absorbed from the GIT? Yes. Does food interfere? No. Is it metabolized in the liver? Yes. What enzymes metabolize it? 2C9 and 3A4 and 1A2. Are there inducers and inhibitors for this? Yes. What are the two important inhibitors? Metronidazole and ciprofloxacin and amiodarone. What are the important inducers? Rifampicin, phenytoin and phenobarbital. So what happens if microsomal enzyme inducer is given with warfarin? Effect of warfarin will come down. What happens if microsomal enzyme inhibitor is given with warfarin? Warfarin level will go up, it may lead to bleeding tendencies. So warfarin, when we are giving to an individual for acute pulmonary thromboembolism alone, is it sufficient? No, because it will take at least 1 to 3 days for the effect to start, and peak effect will come in 3 to 5 days. Simultaneously start parenterally administered drugs like heparin, which have an immediate onset of action. So if someone has DVT or PE which is unprovoked, give treatment for 3 days. If it is unprovoked and recurrent episode is there, give for a longer duration. If it is provoked with a cause, give for 3 months. Unprovoked single episode, at least 6 months. Unprovoked recurrent episode, more than 6 months. Clear cause is identifiable, 3 months. So here you remember that warfarin is given for prophylaxis of DVT, prophylaxis of pulmonary thromboembolism in people with DVT, and in people with atrial fibrillation who have increased risk of stroke. So 3 important things you have to remember is warfarin is used in prophylaxis of deep vein thrombosis, treatment of deep vein thrombosis, prophylaxis of pulmonary thromboembolism, treatment of pulmonary thromboembolism, and people with atrial fibrillation. So if someone asks what are the uses of warfarin, first is prevention of deep vein thrombosis, next is treatment of deep vein thrombosis, second is prevention of pulmonary thromboembolism, the next is treatment of pulmonary thromboembolism, and the last one is in people with atrial fibrillation who are at risk of stroke. So the rest of the things in the afternoon I will discuss. Thank you.